apologise.
All I'm going to say is I'm not going to take lectures on privacy invasion from Prince Harry.
You don't like Meghan Markle. You've made it so clear a number of times on this programme. A number of times. And I understand that you've got a personal relationship with Meghan Markle, or had one, and she cut you off. She's entitled to cut you off if she wants to. Has she said anything about you since she cut you off? I don't think she has, but yet you continue to trash her.
OK, I'm done with this.
No.
Sorry, no. Sorry.
So, do you know what? That's pathetic.
You can trash me, maybe not my
No.
See you later.
I'm being...
Sorry, can't do this.
This is absolutely diabolical behaviour.
In this video, we're going to look at Piers Morgan because he just can't keep his mouth shut. And spoiler alert, it's not going to be the most favourable opinion. And since leaving GMTV with that little tantrum, he's launched his own YouTube channel and has become a bit of an online troll himself. Not surprisingly, he was editor of a tabloid newspaper who were found guilty of hacking into a murdered teenager's phone in order to get content for his newspaper. Although he said he didn't hack the phone personally, he hired private detectives and he listened to the voice messages, but he has the cheek to talk about respecting privacy.
Are you willing to apologise?
Apologise? I think Prince Harry should be apologising for his disgraceful invasion of privacy of the royal family. And others, by the way.
Since Meghan Markle didn't reply to one of his tweets or something, he's literally had a vendetta against her, and for I don't know how many years has been trying to bring her and Harry down in the press. But somehow he manages to see himself as some kind of a outraged moral spokesperson for the state of the UK. And just recently he's been on one of these brosphere podcasts. It's called Modern Wisdom and hosted by Chris Williamson. I had to look him up. He's a former Love Island contestant who was bullied at school, has a master's in business, he's done modelling, reality TV, club promoting, and now has millions of people listening to his podcast, which has the subtitle, Life Lessons from the Smartest People on the Planet. And what better way to get clicks and views than the talking point of immigration making people feel dissatisfied with living in the UK. And the interview's got more dog whistles than Battersea Dogs Home.
Really feels like we've got a lot of turbulence going on. 2 million people voted signed a petition for Keir Starmer to leave. Then this insanely surprising U-turn from Keir Starmer about immigration, saying that the Tories ran an open border policy. All of the riots that we saw across the country this summer. How do you come to think about it? It's the country that you've chosen to live in?
Oh yeah, he was living in the US a little while ago. It's just people coming to this country they've got a problem with.
I think that America has got its confidence back, and Trump has been responsible for that, as has Elon Musk. I think little thing, the rockets going off, right? They just instill in people a sense of America's firing rockets again. They're taking us to the moon, maybe to Mars. There's something heroically ambitious about the way that people like Musk feel, and Trump being down there at the last launch was just great imagery. Yeah. He's making people feel confident again.
I don't get that impression at all. In fact, a lot of Americans were very upset that Trump wasn't holding the Bible at his inauguration. And at a time when the world is literally burning and we have an energy crisis, the idea of getting more investments to go on these lavish space trips, which never work out, and Elon Musk making inappropriate salute just shows how out of touch they all actually are. And they're kidding themselves if they think that's a good image, but that is all they care about.
In the UK, there's no sense of that. There's a sense at the moment of we're just existing and that nothing's really working, that public services are decaying fast.
And what's the reason for that, Piers? Wait for it.
That we're getting far too many people coming in, that obviously we need immigrants to work as a country.
Yeah, it's funny because we had this thing called Brexit that kind of put a stop to that. Now we're all paying the price, just as many intelligent people had predicted.
But you can't have a net migration of nearly 1 million people and expect already struggling public services to not struggle even more. You just can't.
The reason why our public services are struggling is because they've been taken over by private corporations whose business model is to cut costs and maximise profits for the shareholders and to pay their CEOs extortionate salaries. And Piers should know this. He probably holds a lot of shares. Or is he not that smart?
And they said they'd fix the boats. The boats, I think more people are coming in than ever.
The figures were actually down last year, according to the government.
But it's actual legal migration is a big problem, bigger than the boats issue. And we've gone through years again, going back to what we discussed earlier, where you couldn't talk about this if you even raised an eyelid on Question Time about the number of people coming in,
Racist.
you were racist.
Well, Piers, I don't think it would be too much of a stretch to say that you are probably racist. Love Island has definitely been shown to favour white people.
In the same way that if you talk about trans athletes in sport, you're transphobic.
Another one of his favourite topics.
And all that has to stop.
This is their way of bringing up free speech.
We've just seen Keir Starmer give a 2-minute statement which went ballistic on social media.
Not on my social media, it didn't.
Conservatives couldn't have gotten away with 3-4 years ago. Could not have said that. So 2 things. Has the Overton window shifted?
Yes.
And secondly, is this just a guy that's had 2 million people put a petition together for him going, I need to do something to slow
Well, I don't
this.
think it's that so much, but he will certainly have looked at what happened in America and why Trump won. And he'll think, if I don't fix the cost of living, illegal immigration, and stop the woke crap investing my party, I'm done for.
So let's look at who's really been investing in Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, like hedge funds registered in the Cayman Islands, meaning they don't pay tax. They're invested in fossil fuels and health companies, arms manufacturers and asset managers, Sainsbury's, I'm told, and pro-Israel lobbyist funds, which is why the country is in the state that it's in. These podcasts are all about spreading misinformation instead of giving us useful facts.
Particularly if you've got someone circling like Nigel Farage, who is the UK version of Trump, and is a good friend of Trump's, right? And Farage's views were considered extreme. They're now considered increasingly mainstream.
I don't think that's true at all. He just was the lucky latest racist that we've always had in this country to get elected. And he's a corporation owned by a property developer, which you're going to leave out. I know you are. I doubt if he's really friends with Trump. It was probably just a PR opportunity.
Because he's been proven on immigration to be right? Not about everything. Some of the language he's used has been, in my view, wrongly inflammatory. But his basic principle about if you don't have a border, as Ronald Reagan said, if you don't have a proper border, you don't have a country.
That has not been his basic principle. His basic principle has been, because he lives in Folkestone, he was going out and filming boats with people fleeing desperate situations to try and make a better life over here. Because they have nowhere else to go, and we do, to some degree, still support human rights in this country. And then when they get here, they are used by a privately owned corporation called Serco, and they're treated appallingly, whilst having £1 million contracts to process and house them. Because they don't have enough accommodation, they seek out hotels who need the business, which Farage uses to make it seem like they're living in a life of luxury, when most of these hotels are pretty much run down.
Elon Musk rumours a threat of $100 million to be tossed at Nigel Farage. You and him had a bit of a run-in earlier on this year. What do you make of that? Would you be happy to see Farage get 100 mil from Elon?
I don't think you can do that legally in our country. Someone was saying there's a legal impediment to him actually doing that as a
He's rich, he can get around it.
Someone was saying it. That sounds like a credible source. And in case you've forgotten, Elon Musk is South African.
As a foreign citizen, yeah. Look, he obviously had a big effect on Trump winning. I think there's no question of that. Look, I think Elon's allowed to do what he likes. He's a free citizen.
Oh, he's allowed to do whatever he likes. It's the double standards for me.
But would it help the UK politics to have that position?
Well, he would balance it out, because at the moment, Labour certainly have a lot more money coming in than the Tories in the last election. So
how would Elon Musk's racist and tech megalomania balance anything out? And didn't Trump just say what a great job Keir Starmer was doing?
Look, they all take money from people, right? Some take money from very dodgy people indeed. All of us pretend we hate it, but it carries on both sides.
And the reason why we hate it is because it's called corruption. And instead of doing anything to hold them accountable and maybe try and improve things, this being the main reason for our huge wealth inequality, they just carry on with their cliche rhetoric, continuing to dismiss the real issues.
They all want to give up all outside donations. Fine.
If the Conservatives,
they can't really afford to do that.
If the Conservatives are as dead in the water as people think in the UK, is reform where the attention
Reform's in a very, very good position.
I don't believe it, because it has no policies. It's just about winding up racists online, as I've already experienced in the comments section of one of my videos. Unless Piers knows something we don't.
I mean, Kemi Badenoch's got to do something pretty radical and pretty quickly with the Conservative Party, or my prediction would be that Farage may well end up being the next Prime Minister, as Elon Musk has said. I don't think that's a mad idea at all. But he might be by then running a Conservative Party which has had Reform flip into it. That's where my smart money would be, is that they'll do a deal, they'll merge the parties, and that probably Farage ends up contesting the next election.
I can't see any of those people allowing Farage to be their leader. He's an actual slimeball and he only appeals to a certain type of voter. But let's just put the idea into people's heads anyway. This podcast is for smart people.
I'm from a Stockton, working class town, and I saw some videos of Middlesbrough riots going through Acklam, in like places that I know, in places that I've been, and like just working class rage, people disgruntled, and this, six.
Well, hang on. Okay, let's talk about these riots for a minute.
Here we go.
Because that wasn't why they were rioting.
Of course, that's my point. My point is
they were rioting because they were whipped up by people who should know better and probably did know better into believing a certain set of circumstances had happened.
Okay, so they've just been talking about how wealth inequality isn't the problem, how Rishi Sunak, our former Prime Minister, being a billionaire isn't the problem. It's social media, guys.
Surrounding an appalling attack, right? They hadn't. It wasn't actually an illegal asylum seeker who committed these actions. And so people were exacting, in a way, it was a smaller version of the Iraq War, which I oppose so specifically. I'll tell you why. It was fought on an entirely false pretext. Had Saddam had weapons of mass destruction, that war would have been justified.
Personally, I think in a modern civilization, there's a very good argument not to have wars, but that aside, Piers Morgan was sacked from the Daily Mirror for publishing fake photos of British soldiers torturing Iraqi prisoners during the Iraq War. But he's got the cheek to accuse other people of doing the same thing that caused the riots.
Had the person who perpetrated this crime been an illegal asylum seeker, you're not entitled to commit violence, but you're certainly entitled to feel rage about that happening at a time when this whole issue of illegal asylum seekers, coming in and taking over the country, all that argument they put forward, it would at least have had some validity that was why they were angry.
And again, he's completely washing over the issue. That does make people angry. Their homes aren't maintained. Our environment is not maintained. People have mental health issues and they're crammed all living next to each other. They're on medication and pharmaceuticals that affect their brains. Let's not talk about any of that.
Even the premise wasn't accurate.
But everything about it was wrong, right? So the riots were whipped up by people, malevolent voices who should have known better.
In my opinion, you're still doing the same thing right now because that's how you make a living and it always has been.
Tommy Robinson, Andrew Tate and others, I took on Tate about this a few days later, and that's a problem with social media. Now,
this is where we get to the misinformation crescendo, that the problem is social media, when it's that social media is unregulated and people are having mental health issues that we should be looking at.
Let's go further to when a lot of people were put in prison because they tweeted things. That I don't agree with. Right.
Yeah.
And I don't agree with that because it seems a ridiculous overreach. And when you overreach to that level, where people are literally, grandmothers are being put in prison for 2 years for something they put on Facebook.
So apparently being a grandmother makes you above the law now.
That's not a sensible response to this either.
Well, we could look at how the prison system, also run by Serco, the corporation that benefits their shareholders, profits from people who commit petty crime and have mental health issues rather doing than anything to look at what causes these problems and how we could actually do something about it.
If people are actually chucking Molotov cocktails at an asylum seeker hotel, chuck him in prison for a few years. But a granny gobbing off on Facebook, come on, is that what we're really about in this country?
Well, in this country, you are sent to prison if the CPS can prove a crime has been committed, and inciting hate and violence online is considered a crime. There are people on social media that can be a real actual menace in real life, whether they're male or female. There's nothing you can do about them until they commit a crime. And let's not forget when Piers Morgan entertained Fiona Harvey, a literal stalker and liar on his show.
There was the thing I realized when I watched those videos in Middlesbrough was a lot of the people that were walking down the street, there was a new build house with fresh windows, and you could tell because it still had that sort of tape papering over the outside. And, people were out in the streets going through a classic northern terraced working class neighborhood, and someone just picked up a brick and threw it through the window of this brand new house. And that was the point where I was like, this has got nothing to do with the immigration, rightly or wrongly, false pretext or correct pretext. It's just this sort of...
Well, that would be an angry resentment.
To what?
Well, people having what you don't have, and you're feeling. And look, who knows what's going on in these people's lives,
I understand,
right?
but like
I understand the rage of people who maybe through the pandemic have come out and they've got no job. Maybe they've gone through a horrible divorce. Maybe they've got no money. They can't afford to feed their kids. Their lives are shit. And I understand they're going to feel angry. Of course I do. And by the way, there are lots of people in this country who are in that position. Lots. And you've got to understand what is driving
I do.
Sense of anger and resentment.
I'm going to argue that most of those men will take it out on the people around them. That's why they can't have relationships, and we're certainly not going to learn anything or get understanding from listening to this podcast.
Half of my life was spent in that world. 50%. I'm 36. I've been there. I was there until I was 18, and then I left to go to university in Newcastle. So I know these people. I know that culture very well. Yeah. It's electric. It's like the air before a thunderstorm begins. And it's this sort of ambient malevolence below the surface, this disgruntledness.
I often travel to the north of England. I go to Birmingham lots of times, Leicester, Wolverhampton. I've got friends up there. My family's from Newcastle. Also Wales I go 2 or 3 times a year. But in my experience, there is no underlying resentment. People are always really friendly and warm when I travel to other cities. And I feel less threatened than I do in London. And it's the same problems wherever you go. New builds are there to benefit investors. And they put more strain on local resources and they don't benefit the community. And this bit of the video really annoyed me because it's creating the false impression that people that don't have money are the problem, and it is mainly young white men that have these violent tendencies, and it is not dependent on how much money they have. Maybe a lot of them are in debt because they can't live within their means, and they drink and they take drugs. I'm sorry to say it, but that is how a lot of people live. And one of the most frustrating things about these conversations on the riot, they completely ignore that a teenage boy, regardless of his colour or origin, his family came from Rwanda, where genocide has gone on, something which we're not allowed to speak against because then we're called a terrorist. He obviously had a lot of violent issues that the police and social services could do nothing about, even though his parents tried to get help. And no one is questioning that side of the story because it's very awkward and it's very disappointing when this podcast claims to host the smartest people.
Hang on again.
Again, I know. I knew this was going to happen.
They're like a fight, mate. Let's not overthink football hooligans, right? I've seen them in action. Most of them just like a good old punch-up. They like a drink, probably some drugs, and a fight. And they actually love it. And to understand the mind of a football hooligan, you need to start from that. It's not some great...
I mean, even the normal fans, you don't need to be one of the hooligans. Even the guys in the back row, they seem to...
Yeah, the mob mentality can brew up very quickly. Of course, I've been at football matches.
So you think they're downstream from the more aggressive parts of the stadium, so to speak?
I think a lot of football hooligans... I mean, look, when I was young, football hooligans dominated every single match. It was pretty scary and thrilling at the same time. Can't pretend otherwise. When I was 18, 19, watching battles on the terraces was exciting in a way that watching a UFC fight can be exciting. But I'd rather have the more controlled environment than having it happening on a football
where it can
terrace.
spill over into your seat.
And now it doesn't. But I wouldn't over-intellectualize the average British football hooligan, who they might like to see themselves as political polemists with their fists, but they're not. Yeah. Most of them just like a good fight.
And there you have it, guys. That's what he really thinks about the very people that this kind of content is targeting. Piers Morgan could not give a about working class men, whatever that means anymore. I know a lot of guys that like to hang on to these concepts. Is anyone surprised that he's turned on by watching violence? Piers Morgan sails very close to the wind when it comes to staying on the right side of the law. So this is a great opportunity for him to make sure you all understand that football thugs are in a much worse category than him. He still faces the possibility of being charged with perjury, like his mate Andy Coulson, who was the editor of another tabloid newspaper who did go to jail for the phone hacking scandal. And although he keeps having a go at Prince Harry, he's lucky his case against News Group didn't go to trial. Although they did admit liability, the millions of deleted emails might have been shown as evidence of Piers' involvement in the whole sordid mess.
Trust really is everything when it comes to supplements. A lot of brands may say they're top quality, but very few can actually prove it, which is why I partnered with Momentous.
And just to hammer home the point, the whole podcast is sponsored by a supplement company, which in itself is a form of fraud paid for by venture capitalists. Made another video about meal supplements and how Stephen Bartlett sits in exactly the same space. And it's the contradiction of the fact that you're both influencers that get paid to promote products, yet you're sitting there telling people how bad social media is and how we need freedom of speech, and have the absolute front to bring trust up. And in order to get the most return out of your podcast, you've cut it up into neat little episodes, for people that don't have like concentration spans. And your videos are probably going to get a lot more views than mine ever will. But, you know, at least I'm saying something for those of us that do still have a brain. And I hope you had a lovely workout today. And I've experienced men's frustrations with themselves that is perpetuated by your kind of content. It's a very fragile and unrealistic mental space that you're working in, as you keep gaslighting people into not understanding the real economic issues that are causing our problems. And the influencers get paid a disproportionate amount of money compared to the average person for promoting garbage and trash views, but you keep doing you. It's just at some point you're going to have to admit to yourself that you're a fraud. Only recently, Piers Morgan Uncensored, as his podcast is called, censored himself by apologising to Jay-Z's lawyer for spreading false information, which came from an interview he did with Jaguar Wright, a known scammer. But you keep talking about trust. Because the thing that bothers me is I have friends that watch these podcasts or listen to them, and then they try and tell me what's being said because they don't know no better, as these views continue to be pushed on us through the algorithm.